as Annette mentioned, it's Bridges of Washington, D.C. And when Annette invited me, she asked me to customize it just to hit the ones in that cross the Potomac into Virginia. And I immediately said yes, of course, because when somebody asks you to do something like this, you say yes. But I was a little bit trepidatious because the book has like 75 or 80 bridges in it, and Arlington County only has 5. And so I wondered if I could really do justice to the 5, but it really forced me to not only look at the 5 in more detail than I had, but also I ended up looking at them from another angle. And so I took the challenge, and you guys can be the judge if I, really succeeded. But the bridges we're talking about are, we know by their names now, are Chain Bridge, Key Bridge, Theodore Roosevelt Bridge, Arlington Memorial Bridge. I've been told tonight that some people just call it Memorial Bridge. I've always called it Arlington. The 14th Street Bridge Complex, and then not in Arlington County, but further south, we've got the Woodrow Wilson Bridge, and I want to mention some things about that. So what do I mean when I'm talking about the history of a bridge? And I break it into several parts. And, oh, yes, please do that. So the first is the original development of the crossing at the location. So I'm not an architect, I'm not an engineer, I'm not an expert in construction of bridges, but I'm a geologist. I'm really interested in how geology and topography affect trade routes, especially early on, early trade routes, and where trade routes can and can't be built, and where they cross, there are bridges. And so that sort of initial development of a bridge at a new crossing is what really drew me in. Now, at each of those crossings, you can have subsequent generations of bridges. And it's not that those aren't interesting, but they're interesting in a different way. But what can happen is the original bridge often gets destroyed, especially those early bridges were getting destroyed and rebuilt over and over. Floods, rust, whatever. And then there's changes in transportation method. A bridge that's built for horses then needs to be used for railroads, and then cars and trucks, and then expanded volumes. So new bridges get added, but they always get added almost at the exact same location. And there's several reasons for that. One is that there may well be pieces of the original bridge that you can still use. The abutments, the piers are often made of stone, and so they're fairly robust. They don't wash away very easily, but the decks, not so much. They're a little fragile. And so, and you see this like on the Delaware River, every bridge is like the 7th or 8th generation, but they're all sitting on the original piers because the original piers survived. Another thing that's not as obvious as that is making use of the existing road network. So once you build an original bridge at a location, then the roadways start getting developed around it organically, leading to the bridge, because they end up funneling traffic over that single point of the bridge. And so if the original bridge gets destroyed, where are you going to build the new bridge? Well, the roads are already there. You've already acquired the rights of way, or you already own the land. The road network already points towards the bridge, so you're going to use it again. Then you're also going to have changes in the destination, so the purpose of the bridge. Over, some of these bridges are 200 years old, so the reason it was originally constructed no longer exists. But now the bridge has created this organic growth in the road network around it, in the communities around it. Settlements have grown up on the ends of the bridge because bridges induce growth. And so that's the logical place to build the new bridge. There's also then significant historical events that have occurred at the bridge. This may include, destruction or burning, or maybe the bridge was used for some special purpose. So we'll talk about a couple of those. And then Annette mentioned a little self-promotion here. I wrote the bridge spotting books to discuss these different ways that bridges are used other than driving cars across them. Tourists use them, people use them for recreation, historic preservation, decoration, all that stuff. And so when I'm talking about bridges, it's to me, it's not just words. I want to know, what can I go and see today? What's there? How can I visit it? Is there anything, useful seeing there? So I'm sure probably most of you recognize the year 1790 as the year Congress established this 10-mile square as the District of Columbia, as the capital of the new nation. And so let's look at what was here at that time. And there were natural features here, obviously, the Potomac River, what was called the eastern branch of the Potomac River. We call it the Anacostia today. These are inside the 10-mile square. These are really tidal estuaries. They aren't free-flowing rivers. A lot of it was farms and forests. And then we all know it's a hilly area. But there was one special hill that really directed the locations of several of the bridges, Jenkins Hill. So we'll talk about that. Then in terms of man-made features, and I'm sorry, the background is so washed out on this. It's a shame. The man-made features, this 10-mile square included 3 tobacco ports, Georgetown and Bladensburg and Alexandria, for shipping tobacco to England. And they also included, there was also, I guess the best word for it is industrial complex, where Pimmet Run flowed into the Potomac River. And then there's some nearby towns that are significant in terms of the bridges. Leesburg's to the northwest, Baltimore's to the north, major port, obviously. Annapolis is to the east. And Annapolis is, at the time, this was the state of Maryland, east of the river. So that Annapolis is the capital. So that's, a destination, obviously. And then there are 2 existing bridges already before 1790. There's a bridge across the Anacostia at Bladensburg, and there's a bridge across Rock Creek at Georgetown. So going through the bridges one by one in order that they were developed, the earliest one was in 1797, and it was at Little Falls, and it was right where that Pimmet Run industrial complex, commercial, it was mills, distillery, whatever, commercial ventures. It was right where that entered the Potomac River at the base of Little Falls, and it was the road from Leesburg to Georgetown as well. So the purpose of that, this is a blow up of that area. So the purpose of the bridge was really to allow mostly agricultural products from the Leesburg area to be transported into Georgetown to be shipped, materials generated at the Pimmet Run complex to be shipped out of Georgetown. And now I want to go. Now it's got a huge subsequent history, obviously. The first bridge only lasted a few years. It was destroyed by a flood. The second bridge, also destroyed by a flood a few months later. The third bridge is significant because that was 1810, and they built some stone towers, and they suspended a wooden truss from those stone towers using a chain. And that's where the name Chain Bridge comes from, is that bridge that was built in 1810. That was destroyed a couple of years later. And fourth bridge, 1812. And that had a brief moment in history when the British invaded DC. They came in from the east. They came in over the Bladensburg Bridge. And so a lot of the government officials, the government documents, were evacuated out of the city to the west over Chain Bridge. And so the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution were stored for safety at the complex at Pimmet Run. 1840, the fifth bridge. The fourth and fifth bridges are still chain bridges. The sixth bridge, and now we got pictures of it. And it's a wooden truss, and it's not a chain bridge anymore. They built stone piers across the river and across the C&O Canal. And this bridge lasted there for almost 20 years through the Civil War. And then in 1870, that was damaged. In 1874, they constructed a new bridge, and now it's an iron truss, not a wood truss, but it's on the same 1852 piers. That bridge lasted a while until 1937. That was damaged in a flood. They built in 1938 the eighth bridge, and now it's a steel girder bridge, but it sits on the same 1852 piers. And that's the bridge we know and love today. They did raise it, yes. Yeah. So, yes. No, they had to basically reconstruct them. There was erosion around them. They did raise them. They aren't perfectly original. That's good. Yeah. So the subsequent purpose here, obviously, the complex at Pimmet Run no longer exists. Georgetown's no longer a port. So the reasons that this was originally built no longer exist, but the roads are there. So they keep rebuilding bridges at the same location because the piers are there and the roads are there. And it mostly just carries local traffic. It's 2-lane roads. When it crosses into DC at Canal Road, it ends in a T and there's a stoplight, and Canal Road has lane shifting during the day. It's not a major commuting bridge, and it's not a major contributor to the transportation system in DC. But it is a nice bridge to visit. You can visit on foot. It's got parking lots at both ends. It's got a nice sidewalk on it, nice views of Little Falls and the C&O Canal. And it's got a ramp down to the C&O Canal towpath, and it's got historical placards on both ends that discuss this history of Pimmet Run and the C&O Canal, which is why I'm able to talk about it tonight. So the next bridge that was constructed, a new location, we're going to look at L'Enfant for a minute, and I know I'm asked to deal with Virginia, and this isn't Virginia, but bear with me, I'll get there. So I've highlighted in red these diagonal avenues that L'Enfant designed, that when we drive in DC, we always thank L'Enfant because we love these diagonal avenues so much. That's a joke. They create a nightmare to drive. But I'd always assumed that they were random, or you hear about them, like maybe L'Enfant was drawing Masonic symbols on the map. Maybe L'Enfant was trying to confuse enemy invaders by doing you've heard all of that. I have my own theory. I think he was connecting bridges, and I'm going to show you why. So let's look at what was there at the time L'Enfant drew his plan. And the key things, there are 3 ports. There's an existing bridge at Georgetown, and there's an existing bridge at Bladensburg, and there's this Jenkins Hill in the middle. Well, L'Enfant said we need a Capitol building for this new nation. He put it on top of the hill. Then that Capitol building needs to be connected to the outside world. It's a brand new city, needs to be connected. So he connected it to Georgetown with what we know today as Pennsylvania Avenue. And because that's where that bridge crossed Rock Creek in Georgetown. Then he needed a house for the president. He put that right on the same straight street. So these are all linked in one, perfect diagonal. You can probably guess what he did next. He connected both those structures to the existing bridge at Bladensburg with what we know today as New York Avenue, West Virginia Avenue, and Maryland Avenue. Then he proposed some new bridges. One directly east of the Capitol, and one on this straight line from Pennsylvania Avenue. So we're connecting the existing bridge at Pennsylvania Avenue at Georgetown all the way to a new bridge at the Anacostia. He's connecting bridges. Now here's where Virginia comes in. He also drew a diagonal on the other side of the Capitol extending Maryland Avenue. He did not propose a bridge there. But less than 20 years later, they did it anyway. And that's why Long Bridge, which is part of the 14th Street Bridge complex, is located where it is today, because they were basically connecting from Annapolis through the bridge at Bladensburg, directly through the Capitol, straight to the Potomac shore, It's a straight line, and they were connecting the capital largely to Alexandria because Alexandria was a port, and you want to connect the capital to these important commercial locations. A lot of subsequent history of Long Bridge. Again, these bridges were constructed and destroyed and constructed and destroyed. 1809 it started. It was burned in 1814. Damaged in 1831, 1835, blah, blah, blah. At the start of the Civil War, it was occupied by federal troops. It was a road bridge at the time, and they converted it to a rail bridge in order to carry federal troops and war materials into Virginia. And at the same time, they began to construct a parallel bridge right next to it. And when that was done in 1863, they moved the railroad to the new bridge, and they reconverted the original bridge back to a highway bridge. After the war, there were, I think, more generations of these in the late 1800s. But in 1904, the railroad bridge was reconstructed, and that's it. That's the Long Bridge we know today, constructed in 1904. Now, if it's owned by CSX Transportation, if you look at the CSX freight rail map, there is one freight rail bridge over the Potomac River. That's all the freight traffic in the eastern United States, connecting the Northeast to the Southeast. But there's 4 exits to the north and east. There's the 3 that are owned by CSX. And then there's also a separate Amtrak bridge over the Anacostia. So you've got all these different lines coming in from the north and the east, and only one going out to the south. Who says that's a good idea? I think that's a terrible idea. So they've started, I'm sure you know, they've broken ground. I took this picture last Sunday. They're building a new rail bridge. This is in the lower left is the mock-up of it that's on the website. And they're basically adding a new rail bridge to take that pressure off of the existing Long Bridge. They're going to leave the existing Long Bridge, but they're basically adding, several more rails. At the same time, they're adding a pedestrian/bike bridge, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, there's other subsequent history in the 14th Street, what I call the 14th Street complex, because there's highways there as well. I just drove over one an hour ago. The 1906 highway bridge was replaced. And so that was constructed in 1906. In 1950, the Rochambeau Bridge, which is pictured here, was constructed, and it's got a draw span on it. And then in 1962, a third bridge was added. No, that's the 4th bridge, the George Mason Bridge, was added parallel. And then in 1967, the 1906 bridge was demolished. And in 1972, that was replaced with a new bridge. Now, that new 1972 bridge was not given a name at that time. But I'm sure, like me, most of you remember exactly where you were on a snowy January night in 1982. And the Air Florida jet struck this bridge and killed almost 80 people. And Arlen Williams was a passenger on the plane. He helped to rescue several people from the water and became a local hero. And what was done is they moved the Rochambeau name off of this bridge to the 1972 bridge. So that's called Rochambeau today. And then what had been the Rochambeau Bridge, which is this, was then renamed after Arlen Williams. And then I'm sure you're aware there's also a Metro subway bridge there as well. More subsequent history, I'll talk about this idea of inducing growth of settlements in cities on the other side of the bridge. And that obvious, quite frankly, we're standing in it right now. Crystal City largely exists partly because L'Enfant drew a straight line from Bladensburg to the capital to the river. And then we're in the city that grew up on the other side of the river. Many of you probably know the history of Jackson City that was here. I discussed that in the book. I don't have a lot of time for that. And its purpose now, obviously, its purpose has changed because it was originally built to connect the capital to Alexandria. Alexandria is not a port anymore, but now we've got suburbs. And so it's basically carrying traffic from the western suburbs into downtown. Today, personally, I think it's kind of an unattractive mix of the mid-century highway bridges and the industrial bridge. It's all right in there with the monuments. It runs right into the tidal basin. I think if it were done today, it would look different. The George Mason Bridge does have a narrow sidewalk on it, and you can ride your bike across, but it's not a great bike trail connection. But you can use it to get from the Mount Vernon Trail over to the tidal basin. I've done that. The next bridge isn't even a bridge, actually. 1843, it was a trough that held water, watertight trough, that was an extension of the C&O Canal across the Potomac to another canal. This is just a schematic location. I don't really know where the location of the canal in Virginia was, but it connected Georgetown to Alexandria. And now commercial ventures that are shipping materials on the C&O Canal to the port of Georgetown, now they can ship those materials out of the port of Alexandria instead. So that's literally its only purpose. Here's just a close-up to see how it was located, exactly where it was located. It's not at the closest point to Alexandria, where you might think it would be, because in Georgetown, there are locks on the eastern end that lower the level of the water down to sea level at Rock Creek. And then to the west of that, it's a busy port. There's warehouses, there's docks, there's factories, et cetera, and homes. So the aqueduct was located a little further west of Georgetown. Subsequent history of the aqueduct. Again, it was taken over by the federal troops at the start of the Civil War. They drained the water from it and converted the bottom of the trough to a roadway, again, to support the war effort in Virginia. After the war, they returned it to private ownership, and that private ownership reconverted it back to an aqueduct again. But also by that time, the C&O Canal was having competition from the Georgetown branch of the B&O Railroad, which you can actually see here going into Georgetown. The terminus of the railroad was there. And so in 1888, they reconverted it back to a road bridge. And I've noted you guys on your Facebook page this week, the past week or so, have been posting multiple photos of it as a road bridge. Eventually, it needed to be replaced as well. And this, I think it's a remarkable photo. My sister found it in an antique shop in Annapolis. It is Key Bridge under construction in 1922. And right next to the aqueduct, this would be one of the last photos of the aqueduct as it was still operating. And once the Key Bridge opened in 1923, they cut off the ends of the aqueduct, so it couldn't be used anymore. But then it was another 10 years before they actually removed the deck. And then in the 1960s, they removed the piers except for one. And then this idea of bridge-induced growth happened again. The entire sort of downtown area of Roslyn grew up at the end of the bridge. Going and seeing it today, you can see in the lower right, the aqueduct arch. So these people are running on the Capitol Crescent Bike Trail, which occupies what used to be the Georgetown branch of the B&O Railroad, where it came in underneath the aqueduct into Georgetown. And there's no historical placard there, for it. And it's just so old and unusual looking. I would like to have seen that. You can still see the one pier that's left. If you go to the parking lot at Roosevelt Island and then walk up the trail there underneath Key Bridge, that's what you see. is the pier there, and you can see directly across to the aqueduct arch on the other side. Obviously, you can see Key Bridge itself from large areas. It's a very high bridge. It's one of the major landmarks of Washington, and it carries local traffic. It doesn't carry a major highway because it really predates interstate highways. But it is very important for carrying pedestrians. It's very busy carrying pedestrians between Georgetown and Roslyn, and also for cycling on the regional bike trails. North of here, the regional bike trails are on the C&O Canal Towpath and on the Capitol Crescent Trail. But south of here, so those are on the northeast side of the river. South of here, the major regional bike trail is Mount Vernon, and that's on the west side of the river. So if you want to ride long distances, which I do, that's where I make the connection. You jump off at the canal, cross on Key Bridge, and then continue on the other side. Arlington Memorial Bridge. So this was proposed and debated, and there were commissions, Macmillan Commission and other commissions, and design competitions for 100 years before it was built. It was originally proposed in like the 1830s, and it was always, even I found some evidence that even before the Civil War, it was being discussed as a commemorative, not commemorative, but a symbolic link between the northern states and the southern states. And after the Civil War, they were still discussing that. Should it be a memorial to Ulysses S. Grant? Designs, how should it be decorated, etc. Nothing really happened until 1922, when there was a dedication ceremony at the tomb of the unknown soldier. And so remember, at that time, the only bridges are the Aqueduct and Long Bridge, and neither of those go anywhere near Arlington Cemetery. So there were traffic jams, and Warren Harding got stuck in a traffic jam trying to go to Arlington Cemetery, and for a couple hours. And once that was, done, things moved pretty quickly, and they ended up constructing the bridge by 1932. Now, it was deliberately made low profile. Remember, 1932, the C&O Canal is now closed. Georgetown is really not much of a port anymore by this time, but they still built it as a very low profile bridge deliberately because they didn't want to interfere with the sight lines of this symbolic connection between, the north, which is represented by Lincoln's Memorial, and the south, which is represented by Robert E. Lee's house at the cemetery. So there were ideas to make a taller bridge or ideas to put monuments on it. All those were really shot down because they wanted to preserve the sight lines. Subsequent history, it's got the statues on the eastern end, which are much in the news these days. They're behind scaffolds right now. In 2022, the bridge was entirely renovated, and so it was built with a draw span. And Rochambeau had a draw span, and Longbridge had a rotatable span. But when George Mason was built in 1962, for financial purposes, just to reduce costs, they built it without a draw span. By then, Georgetown wasn't a port anymore anyway. But when they did that, the draw spans on the other bridges became moot. There was never any reason to open them because you couldn't move ships. And so they left the draw span here, but in 2022, it was degrading, and so they replaced that broken draw span with a fixed steel span. They dressed it up on the outside so it looks exactly the same, but it's a new fixed span, which will last a long time. You can still, they left the control room for the draw span in place. When you walk across on the sidewalk, there's these mysterious stairs leading down to mysterious bronze doors. That's the control room, which is underneath the deck of the bridge. The Park Service left that in place. It's not open to the public. If anybody knows a way to get me in there, I would kill to go in there. It's got very wide sidewalks. One of the major purposes of it is I do that. I'll bet some of you do this. When relatives come to town or people who've never been to DC, I live on the north side of DC, the northeast side. But if I've got somebody new, I drive around and take them in on Arlington Memorial Bridge because that's where the views are. I mean, that's where the monuments are. And I still remember my family moved to Maryland when I was 7 years old. And the first time we went into DC, my dad piled us in the station wagon. There were a bunch of us and drove all the way around, and he brought us in over Arlington Memorial Bridge. And I still remember, the impression the monuments made. It's got great wide sidewalks, offer a pedestrian link, and it does connect the Rock Creek Trail to the Mount Vernon Trail, except you have to cross the GW Parkway, which is, I kind of scares me. Woodrow Wilson Bridge is the next crossing that was developed, 1961. No secret here on the purpose. It was part of the Beltway to pass traffic, bypass around DC so it didn't have to go through, connect the Maryland suburbs to the Virginia suburbs. When it was built, the Beltway was 6 lanes, so the bridge was 6 lanes. And shortly thereafter, they expanded the Beltway to 8 lanes, which created traffic jams at the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. And it was also fairly low and it had a draw span, which created more traffic jams. So in 2007, it got replaced with an 8-lane bridge. It also induced growth, obviously, in Alexandria, and the entire National Harbor thing didn't even exist until, recently. But this really introduced, and this is a big theme of the bridge spotting books in the DC Bridge book. It introduced this new era. We're no longer in the 1950s and 1960s where we don't incorporate aesthetics into bridges. We're doing sculptural bridges. Personally, I think it's gorgeous. It's got a very wide sidewalk with observation areas you can pull off with benches overlooking the city. They're now incorporating recreation in the new bridges. They've done the same on the new Frederick Douglass Bridge. It connects the bike trails to Mount Vernon Bike Trail, which goes right under it. On the Alexandria end, it crosses over Jones Point Park, and there's the original boundary stones are at that location. This bridge just has a whole bunch going for it. I really love it. Which leads to a bridge I don't love, which is the Theodore Roosevelt Bridge, which is, really just a 1964 interstate highway bridge. It was built. So you had a presentation here, I understand, a few months ago, and your speaker, it was about the 1961 general land use plan. And your speaker pointed out that by 1961, Arlington County was kind of already built out. And they were, but the western counties were still booming. And so they had to build these highways and these bridges to, allow the further out suburbs to develop. But these things just passed through Arlington County. And this is a perfect example of that. Just carries I-66 to downtown. I'm not the first author to write negatively about this bridge. Even if it was maintained, it's not a very attractive bridge, and it has not been maintained until now. So, and it's right in the monumental core. It's just a shame that they let it go the way they did. It's right over Roosevelt Island, right in front of the Kennedy Center. But I took a picture when I was down there on Sunday, and they are currently sandblasting that paint and the rust off of it. And they're apparently going to paint it finally. And it does have a narrow sidewalk on one side. Again, it really isn't really useful for connecting bike trails, but they are expanding the deck to expand the ability to ride bikes over to Roosevelt Island, connect to the Mount Vernon Trail. So that's all a good thing. Three Sisters Bridge. I can't let this go without mentioning it. Most of you probably know about it. In 1972, it was proposed. And by then, transportation planners were starting to realize every time we build one of these new interstate highway bridges, because the old ones are too, backed up, well, the new one gets backed up in a few years. Well, what's up with that? Well, it's because these bridges keep inducing growth. And by 1972, they kind of realized this isn't sustainable. And not only that, by 1972, people were considering more about incorporating aesthetics into bridges, environmental impacts of bridges, historical preservation issues created by constructing new highways and bridges, and it got protested and successfully protested, and it was withdrawn. And that's what it looked like last Sunday. These three rocks out there are the Three Sisters, and I kind of like the way it looks today. Now, after this project was canceled, there was not another bridge built in DC for more than 30 years. Between 1950 and 1971, they built like a dozen. When this was canceled, they stopped building them, period, cold turkey. And then when they started again, they were really just replacing existing ones. Sitting right here in 2026, what year is it? There has not been a new crossing created since 1964 in more than 60 years. We will move on to questions, but first some self-promotion, if that's okay. Email address. So I've got the books have black and white photos. I wish they had color, but then it would cost hundreds of dollars. And I've got like 8,000 color photos of DC bridges. And so I've been trying to get them out to people to see. And so I've been rotating them on galleries on bridgespotting.com. I've got a Facebook page called Bridge Spotting where I've been trying to post DC bridges. I recently started a new Facebook group called Bridges of Washington, DC. Maybe you can join and help me boost that.
What's your email? It looks like it's long.
It is bobdover6647 at AOL. I'm old, so AOL. The book, like I said, really covers 75 or 80 bridges. And the bridges, I've discussed today, the oldest of those is Key Bridge, which is, it's 100 years old. But in terms of the city as a whole, Key Bridge doesn't crack the top 10. There are a bunch of older bridges in DC that all have sort of similar interesting stories to what I've been telling you. So to find out about that, you have to buy the book. And or come to one of the events, because I do more broad full DC presentations. So I've got a list there. Somebody emailed me and asked me if there was other presentations. There are. What else here? Oh, yes. Have you seen anything good here tonight, or you see something good in the book? Write a review or tell your friends and neighbors. One of the things that really drove me to write the book is the changes that the city has made, especially on the Anacostia, where they've been redeveloping, former industrial neighborhoods on the shorelines with, new developments, new parks. There's, bike trails that you can ride, both sides of the Anacostia on your bike, all the way out to Bladensburg and back on the other side. It's just, they're attracting young people to want to live downtown again. They're attracting, tourists to the riverfronts, something that really, has been done on the Potomac a little bit, never been done on the Anacostia, but they're doing that. And that was what really drove me to write the book, because it is my hometown, and I want to support that they've made this effort to really use the bridges to help drive that effort. So that's my pitch for the book, and I will take questions. I did the 45 minutes, so. Now,
Bob, it may help to repeat a question, because out in Zoom land, they can't necessarily.
I will do that. Now you guys can tell me, because I don't know Arlington County history, so you can tell me what I got wrong. Sean.
This won't be a Arlington question, but it is something I'm curious about. Woodrow Wilson Bridge has a span.
Yes.
Do you know when it was last open and how often it's open?
Yes. So the question is, when was the last time the Woodrow Wilson draw span was opened? And the answer is a couple of weeks ago. So when they replaced it, there was a debate and argument, maybe certain people wanted to put in a very high bridge, so it wouldn't have a draw span at all. People in Alexandria didn't like that because then it would be more visually intrusive. So they wanted a low bridge. So what they did is they compromised. So the current draw span is actually quite a bit higher. I think it's 30 feet or something like that. Yeah, it's quite a bit higher than the old draw span. So it doesn't have to open nearly as often as the old draw span did. Does that make sense?
Oh, shit, that makes.
Yeah. Yeah, they took a tall ship in there recently.
Oh, yes.
Just yesterday?
It did. I think it's happening this Saturday.
Yeah, I don't know how often it happens, but I did see it on Facebook recently.
Yeah, sailing, around the world
Yeah.
sailing we've got.
Yeah.
Yeah, very tall.
Yeah, but it's not really open as a port. Alexandria Robinson Terminal is closed. Anyway,
Did you dig deeper into some of the unique parts of Chain Bridge? Like at one time it was the tallest bridge in the world, and people were fainting going on it. Horses wouldn't go on it, and there was all kinds of these unique stories. I didn't know if you touched on it, and I just brought it.
I don't have the story about people fainting. Let me say that for every bridge, I ran across sort of random stories like that. And I put, as many of them I could in the book. So one I didn't mention at Chain Bridge is the apocryphal story or anecdotal of how the first bridge collapsed, because apparently farmers were bringing their cattle into Georgetown to sell them, and they sell them by weight. So these farmers were, when they got to Pivot Run, they were like letting the cattle drink as much water as they wanted to drink. So when they got to Georgetown, they'd be heavier and they'd sell for a higher price. And there was a theory that it was these waterlogged cattle that caused the bridge to collapse. So is that a good enough substitute for?
I was surprised during all the discussion about the Triumphal Arch, how far the border of Washington, D.C. goes to our side of the Potomac River.
Yeah.
Just the fact that Arlington maybe doesn't own any of the land on our side of the bridges, has that ever made any difference? Like, does Arlington get no say about the bridges because of where the border is?
Some of you probably know the answer to that better than I do because you know Arlington politics. I think the answer is Arlington has always had a say. Even though they don't own part of the bridge, they own the roads leading to the bridge. And also, especially since 1969, the National Environmental Policy Act, everybody has a say in everything. And that's been my career, so I think that's fine. But if you're asking me if Arlington can, say anything about, what happens on Columbia Island, which is where that arch is, proposed, I don't know.
Just point of clarification. The border between Virginia and District of Columbia is on the edge.
That's right.
Virginia has no right, sovereignty, any part of it. And it gets confusing after the Roosevelt Bridge, and it kind of, the border snakes in Virginia side. Good part of George Washington Parkway between 395 going up to Memorial Bridge actually goes through the District of Columbia.
And part of the reason for that is the border is where the original edge of the river was. And if they filled in, then now that's DC.
That is absolutely right, but also Congress in 1945 actually has a very detailed description of the boundary between DC and Arlington, and you can follow it along map. That tells you where the boundary is. Matter of fact, you go out there and you see these discs that are planted in some of the roadways
Okay,
that actually trace.
very good. I suspect some of you know a lot more about that than I do. Yeah. Yes.
So I share your love for Roosevelt Bridge. So I'm glad, actually glad that they've learned that they're actually widening some of the bike lanes, because I can't pass another person
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah, I've tried. Yeah.
Yeah, so I actually had a thought that they could actually replace the bridge with a better bridge that also included a new metro line. That can help, alleviate some of the logjam in the Roslyn Tunnel.
So my bridge spotting book, where I'm talking about these other uses of books, other uses of bridges, it's about tourist bridges, recreation bridges, etc. Chapter 10 is titled Bridges Not for Tourists. And basically places where an opportunity has been missed, where you really could have done something that would have enhanced a community and that opportunity was missed. And I basically make a detailed proposal for my dream bridge that I would build at Roosevelt Bridge. Obviously, it's not going to be done, but
So
it
a more architecturally pleasing bridge?
more architecturally pleasing, more recreational friendly, etc. Yes.
I would also add a metro line down the middle of it.
I did not write that, but I don't disagree.
We've also stopped Kennedy Center.
There you go. Yep. Yes.
So in some cities around the world, like Prague, for example, the older bridges turn into pedestrian bridges.
Yep.
Do you ever think that the Arlington Memorial Bridge would be turned into a pedestrian recreation?
I doubt if it could be done politically, just people would oppose it. In the bigger presentation, I make the point that right now, today, there has never been a pedestrian bridge over the Potomac or the Anacostia. A couple of years from now, there's going to be 3. That's part of this revolution in bridge construction that they're doing. So they're doing the one I pointed out over the Potomac at 14th Street. They're doing 2 of them over the Anacostia, one at the Arboretum and one at 11th Street that's going to be actually a park over the Anacostia. And so I don't know that they'll be turning any of the existing bridges into pedestrian, but they are building new pedestrian bridges with bike trails in mind.
Let me make a comment about this is being recorded, and where these pictures that Bob showed were a little washed out because of the projector, they come through very clear in the recording.
Yeah.
That'll be posted on the Arlington Historical Society YouTube website tomorrow.
Awesome.
Any questions?
No.
We have one here though.
Where would you build a bridge where it isn't? I mean, where there isn't one now, where would you propose one?
If you had asked me that a year or so ago, I would have said at the Arboretum. There's a long stretch along the Anacostia, like 4 or 5 miles, where there's no bridge. And but now they are proposing a pedestrian bridge there. I don't know on the Potomac. There's a large area without a bridge. Well, obviously Three Sisters. There's a large area between Key Bridge and Chain Bridge where there's no bridge. But the Palisades, that's the Potomac Gorge. I can't see that ever being done.
Yeah, basically the last bridge is the American Legion Bridge, and the next one up, Point of Rock.
Yeah.
So somewhere in the middle of that.
Well, and that wouldn't be a DC bridge, but yeah, it would deal with regional traffic. Yeah.
It'll deal with getting how to replace white there.
Yeah.
When you think of the metropolitan area as a whole.
Yeah.
That's the bridge that isn't there.
And that would take pressure off of these bridges. That's correct. I've got red shirt first.
Do you have anything to say about ferries that may have existed before these bridges?
I don't say a lot about it. I know they existed. Obviously they were able to move across the Potomac. There was one at Georgetown I know about. I'm quite sure there was one at Alexandria. But I really don't have a lot of detailed information about that.
What's your favorite
Whole world, not just DC. To walk across. Have you guys walked across the Golden Gate? It's just, I've done it a few times. And then Charles Bridge in Prague, who mentioned Prague. In DC, I get an old and a new one. The old one is Taft Bridge over Rock Creek, is just stunning. You know, the decorations on it. And as far as new bridges, Frederick Douglass is largely what caused me to write the book. When I saw it from across the river, and so the gentleman who wrote the foreword for this book designed the Woodrow Wilson Bridge. He's the architect, and then he was also involved in the contracting for the Frederick Douglass Bridge. So when I saw those archers, I called him and I said, "What the heck?" And he said, "This is what we're doing." And this whole idea of now building bridges with aesthetics in mind is just fantastic. And DC was sort of behind a lot of other cities, but they're here. And if you don't know what's going to happen at the 11th Street Bridge Park, look up the 11th Street Bridge Park. It's going to be awesome. You know about the High Line in New York City? They're basically building one of those over the Anacostia, starting later this year.
I asked the same question about the ferries.
Okay. I mean, you guys know Arlington. Were there ferries coming into Arlington that you know about?
But the Georgetown ferry, that was where you'll see Civil War photographs of Union soldiers on Mason Island and with the ferry. But I was going to ask you there, from the island to Roslyn, I think there was a small bridge or yes.
Yeah, there may well have been, because what was that, Anna Island or something like that? Yeah, because that's and that's part of this question about where the DC bridge boundary is, or the DC Arlington boundary that people get wrong, is because it's not just the western shore of the river, it's the western shore of the boundary channel of the river.
That abutment was still there in the 1970s.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
They took it down when they built the pedestrian bridge to Penny Rosal.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Thank you so much.
This is awesome. Thank you.